welcome everybody to the fourth episode of our BiblioSophia channel. Today we're going to be speaking with Jose Gabriel Alegría Sabogal, who we will have known from the previous work with Aurorae, and now he's back with his own full book, Iao. This beautiful release that I've just got in the mail and just worked my way through, Iao, the Ophite Iconography. So this is the collector's edition I'm holding up here, but also the standard edition is quite beautiful, and we have not yet seen, as of recording, what the artisanal edition will look like, but I'm sure that one's going to be amazing as well. So I'm really excited to speak with him today. Really one of the most interesting illustrators, artists that I've seen in recent years. As you guys will see here in the background, I have the full-size print that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail throughout the interview today. So I guess, Jose, I'd like to start with asking you about how long you've been creating, artworks in general, and specifically in the style that you've used in Iao. Is this sort of something that was self-taught for you, or did you learn the techniques that you're using through sort of university or something like this?
Well, hi Michael. First of all, thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome.
Yes, regarding the techniques, well, yes and no. I sort of have been drawing my whole life, so I couldn't really tell that I learned at a certain point, and I simply never stopped doing so. So I learned gradually during my whole life, more or less. All kids start drawing, so I never stopped. I was very stubborn with that. And then I went to art school. So I was sort of the guy obsessed with anatomy, and so things took its course. But when I was around 15, I remember my father gave me a book of Albrecht Dürer, and I was like completely amazed, and of course I started copying all the engravings, and basically became my life sort of statement. Like, if I'm going to draw something, I want it to be just like this. This is the most amazing style that I've ever seen. I learned, of course, the technique that I'm using right now, which is basically nib and ink in university, and I also learned more or less traditional painting and traditional printmaking with copper plates and so on. What I'm doing right now is sort of a mix, because I do sort of direct drawing using the line technique that is used for copper plate engravings, as you will recognize. Many people get confused. They think they are actually engravings in the old style, but the originals are always just direct drawings. So it's sort of a hybrid. And it developed, and I just got stuck into that sort of modus operandi, you would call it, that way of working, and it just became the most honest, straightforward way of doing it for me, because I wanted that outcome, but I didn't want the whole printmaking issue, because it was too complicated, but at the same time it didn't make more sense nowadays, because printmaking was originally a way of reproduction, which we don't need anymore, and I prefer that there is only one original for each drawing. It's cooler for me, actually, that way. And actually, yeah, we have different ways of reproducing things nowadays, and I want to make sort of a contrary statement to that. I don't want. I'm not that much of a friend with modern technology, so it was sort of a mixture between my personality and that statement. Yeah, I don't know if it answers your question.
Sure. So, you to expand a little bit further, you said it's a hybrid technique. So, it's sort of like what you're saying is, like with printmaking, you would start with like an engraving that you make that you can then stamp onto things. But what you're doing is you're using a pen. You said is what you work with.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was I assumed it was either pen or charcoal pencil. So.
No, it's this one.
Oh, perfect. Nice. Yeah, so you're using a pen to reproduce the sort of aesthetic of that print.
Yes.
That's what I thought, and it really is a beautiful style, the way that it comes out, because I'm a huge fan of classical, as many people that are going to be watching this channel will be, a fan of old books, and these prints are sort of the only way that illustrations used to get into old books, through, the sort of plates, which more or less, I guess, is the same thing that we're talking about here. So it really does sort of bring into a modern age this ancient technique, because as you said, we don't need to make the prints anymore. Now you just do your drawing however best it works for you, which is by hand. Obviously, I think that can, well, maybe you could speak a little bit about that, what the difference would be for you, if beyond the fact that you don't need to use the prints that way anymore. It would be harder to get the subtleties that you get, right?
Yeah, I actually like to control very closely the outcome. And so when it comes to reproduction, each print would be a bit different, and I wouldn't have that much freedom. I can actually take different freedoms that I couldn't take if it came to printmaking. And also, I like this mixture with the manuscript format as well, when it comes to calligraphy, for example, or the red seals and so on, because it's more or less, you can also work things directly into the final result and decide what you're going to do on the way. And in that way, it's more sort of, I would say, improvised as well. I don't really know what the drawing is going to look like in the end. I'm not that systematic, although I might look like it, but I really like not knowing what to expect in the end. And sometimes I fail, sometimes I think I make mistakes for every drawing, but people don't notice, because one learns how to mask that up and to basically make it arrive to a nice ending. But that's sort of the process that I like from direct drawing, so to speak. It's more primordial. You can do it anywhere as well, because for old style engraving, you need the big presses, you need acid, you need the copper plates, and it's actually not doable if you want to travel a lot. So I don't know if this is just a side note, a very off the track, but okay. When the Spanish tried to make prints in the New World, they brought the copper plates, but they didn't have the acid, and they didn't have the big presses machines, and so they were left with these useless copper plates, and they started using them for painting on top.
Oh, really?
So you actually have some colonial works that are engraving on one side and painting on the other, because it was all obsolete. And so
wow, that's crazy.
That's a crazy thing. And also many engravings were used as the basis for painting in Europe and in the Americas at the same time. So I actually like that dialogue between painting and engraving, and not making actually not making any of those. Like, it's something else right now, but yeah.
I think Gabriel shared this on Instagram recently, that you were visiting him and you actually did work on a little bit of your art, like there at his house, which sort of lends to the concept that you can, you could just sit down at some random kitchen table in some other country and just get to work and come up with just as good of quality artworks as if you were in your own studio, which is, I would imagine, very beneficial.
Yeah, that's actually what I like from this technique as well. I like this sort of dynamics where I can just sit down wherever and just go on and on, as long as I have a good book at my side and paper, and I've basically invented my own suitcase so I can carry whatever I need, everything I need in one.
That's awesome.
In one small bag, so I can work wherever. So yeah, that's actually part of my technique. I like this idea of a traveling manuscript that you can just make it on your way. So
yeah, and you did mention paints a few minutes ago, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because something that I find really interesting about your works in Yao and also in Aurorai is it's for the most part black and white, but when you do use color, the fact that it's being used at all really draws your eye to it, because so much of the work is black and white. So what do you use to do the color? And second, like, how does that symbolism end up manifesting itself for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the technique, so speaking materially first, I usually use one layer of simply watercolor. And on top of that, I do land work. So it's always 2 layers at least. And you can actually modify different layers. But I like using, as you see, like sort of plain colors, only one tone that just sort of explodes in the image. And that's actually something I took from many traditions, Eastern traditions of engraving. They sometimes do that in Japanese engraving, but mostly the combination of black and white on paper and red, which actually comes from Chinese seals, which I collect with a lot of
nice.
With a lot of love, and I started carving my own because I love that. I just loved that aesthetics and how that also could sort of cross-pollinate with the engraving tradition of the West, which has this black and white, but the Eastern tradition has this aesthetics of calligraphy and the red seal that just explodes into the image. And so it's a sort of cross-pollination, because the seal that I use the most is a mixture between the Dural seal, the Dural signature, which is this AD. I just made my own with my own initials, but I carved it on stone, on a Chinese seal. So it's a mix between the two traditions, I say, between the two aesthetics, because it's just what I enjoyed. Symbolically, as you might have noticed, I'm completely obsessed with that sort of deep red, like that.
Yes.
I would call it that hibiscus tone, that's blood red, basically. It's the color of the goddess Durga, for example. It's always identified with sacrifice and also with offerings in an auspicious way as well. Not sacrifice in a spooky manner, but sacrifice also in an auspicious way, saying, well, I'm giving all I have for this cause. And so, I started getting more and more obsessed with that color. I've tried to include more colors in Yao. But as you see, my fixation with red is pretty intense.
Yeah. And it obviously works. It lends itself nicely to the works that you're covering, because that blood red is quite necessary in a lot of the things that you're conveying. Obviously, a lot of these are blood-soaked figures that everything else is black and white, and then you just have this blood-soaked Christ or many other different figures. And then you mentioned Durga, the Hindu goddess Durga. So it's very obvious that you are, extremely interested in Gnosticism and different currents of Christian and I guess, Jewish mythologies and religiosities, however you want to put it. But I was quite surprised by the amount of Hinduism references and, to a lesser degree, Buddhism references that are included in your text. And I really enjoyed that they were there, and I've learned a lot from that. How long have you been interested in Eastern religions? Does that go quite a ways back, or is that something more newer to your thought process?
Well, that's quite a story. So I was always fascinated with the iconography of esoteric Buddhism mostly. First time I saw esoteric Buddhist art was in the Museum of Dahlem in Berlin. And they have this wonderful Tibetan collection, and I was completely amazed. I think I was around 13, 12, more or less, and I was completely convinced this is otherworldly stuff. These people are having visions. But actually I had no introduction, no idea of what that could mean. My father also introduced me to this idea that Sanskrit was sort of the root language for a lot of languages. So that was stuck in my mind, but I had no way to go into that. And I met this professor, Jose Leon Herrera. He was a very recognized Sanskrit scholar. He died 1 year ago, and he sort of adopted me as a Sanskrit pupil. I was very, very proud of that, very devoted to him. And he started teaching me some years, as much as we could go before he died. Because actually nobody else was so committed to the cause as me. We were only like 2 students from him, and we were basically staying at his house and so on, because nobody else in the university program was interested in going that deep into Sanskrit. And yes, he got me. I don't know how much I know on that regard, because he was my only master, and I haven't been able to compare my knowledge on that regard. My posture, however, is that I don't practice, or I cannot fully adopt as a Westerner an Eastern religion, so to speak. I do feel that on an unconscious level, I'm really Christian or medieval Catholic, more or less, because that was sort of my upbringing. That's what it's in my heritage, so to speak, and I cannot escape that fact, despite the fact that I personally might not like it, but I feel my opinion is not really worth it on that regard. It's just some world of symbols that you're born into, and I've done my best so far to learn as much as I can from Sanskrit. He was mostly into the Rig Veda, which is the oldest text from Sanskrit literature. So Vedic Sanskrit, it's a whole issue, but we were not actually into the fact of adopting Eastern religions, which is actually the position of Jung has as well. That you as a Westerner cannot really get committed into it. I don't preach that into other people. I don't say, well, you are a Westerner, you can't do this. It's up to you. But I myself, I feel I cannot, despite the fact that I am fully committed to the knowledge of it. So yeah, it's a strange story, but well.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting story, and that's really cool that you learned Sanskrit on a more academic level. I wasn't expecting that to be part of what you were going to tell me here. And also there was a book that I read about a year back. That's what I'm randomly looking around at here. I was looking to see if I had it on my shelf here beside me. Journeys in the Kali Yuga. The author's name is eluding me right now, unfortunately, and it's not sitting here, but he went through a very similar process where he was following Hinduism. He was actually sort of a practitioner, and he had to go and spend a decent amount of time in India and with a guru before he was really getting ready to take his next step into the process, and said, this can never be me. I have these traditions from Finland, and I need to go back home and focus on the ancient traditions of my people. I can never be a Hindu. This is the Indian people, and that's what they know. And so, yeah, that's I think that's a really interesting story. And it sounds like if in no other way than in your mind, you've sort of been through that same journey that he went through.
Well, maybe. But I think it opens a lot of gates towards your own understanding when you actually can learn about a completely different mindset. Christians love to do false equivalences between Christianity and something else. They like saying, for example, oh, our religions worship God. That's completely false. A creator God is not even part of it, of many religions, as something that you should worship at all. There's a common confusion regarding the concept of Brahma and Brahman and so on. So I think it's eye-opening. It's really important. I like this saying from the Jesuit Desideri. He learned a lot of Tibetan Buddhism. He tried to approach as much as he could Tibetan Buddhism, and he just believed that having knowledge of two religions is like having two lamps in one dark room. So it's just knowledge. You need it. You got to take it. And also, I took it because I found this teacher, but otherwise I wouldn't have ventured that far, because it's like, well, if you don't have somebody to teach you the language, you're not going to get too deep. So that's why I didn't get more into Hebrew, for example, because I couldn't find anybody to teach me proper Hebrew in the traditional way and so on. So it's just take the opportunity that you find and so on. So I think it's random, but that's my position. So and my journey.
It was really interesting for me that you brought these topics up into your book, because it seems like more and more, especially now in the 21st century, a lot of people are starting to see all of these connecting points between, Tantra, Hinduism, Buddhism, and all of the Western traditions, where, there's so many points to be made on this, and I think there's so many books that are still going to be written on these topics of where there's overlap and where evolution from one has went into the other. How long have you really been thinking about this yourself?
Well, I had this intuition, but until I found the work by Edward Conce, which he sort of posits this relationship between Gnosis and Buddhism, basically. That's his paper. Mm-hmm. And also, I think his name was... I lost this German guy. India and Europe was his book. He's a German teacher as well. He posits that there might have been this ancient connection. But actually, I wouldn't venture that as a theory in itself. So what I try to do is just point to specific texts, specific points, specific verses when I can say, well, this is here and here, but not jump into a bigger theory. You know, I try to keep it on the facts, on the literature. And I feel it's too daring for me to do so yet, because I'm not really a scholar on both things at the same time. It requires a lot of knowledge to be able to understand and compare ancient Christianity and Tantra, which is actually late for Hinduism, and how they both overlap in their own very complex ecosystems, religious ecosystems, and so on. So I was always sort of grooming this idea, but until I wrote Yao, I wasn't feeling prepared to posit that. And still, although it's there, I try to be careful. As I mentioned, I try to point out very specifically when those things happen in each form of literature. Conce calls it the antinomian society, so to speak, because it's a form of religion that actually might defy the postulates of its own morality, of its own society. So actually what happens in Tantric Buddhism and Hinduism is that you find certain yogis, certain siddhis defying the laws, the traditional laws of their own system, of their own religion, although they are doing religion. So it's very complex, and that's what happens with Gnostic teachers as well. They make postulates that are very, very defying, even blasphemous sometimes, and there is this sort of bipolarity between obedience and transgression, which is very mysterious, very strange. I think it's a pattern of initiation, so to speak. So, yeah. Well, it's a big topic. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. You know, there's so much more that can still be touched on that topic. But as you said, you know, you could talk on that one all day. So we'll just move on instead. I wanted to ask you about your dedication at the beginning of the book. You say, "To the memory of my father who always despised my mystical ramblings, here they are." I really got a laugh out of that when I read it. So I'd like if you could just give us a little bit more context on where that dedication came from.
Well, I've been coming to terms now with the fact that sort of my father made me what I am, and at the same time not. So it's also a sort of puzzling. It was a puzzling relationship, religion as well. So he was very rational, very anti-religious. He taught philosophy all his life. He taught mostly Kant. He was like very much into this rationalistic way of thinking, very morality-driven. Religion for him only served this purpose of keeping morals in society and so on, which is more or less the Kantian view, of course summarizing a lot. And I always had this drive towards mysticism, dark things, and so on. I was completely obsessed with religious iconography my whole life as well. And he really didn't like that. He was like, "Why are you always into this sort of arcane and completely useless images and things?" So yeah, and I started finally coming to terms with him when I was finishing my master's in art history, because it was like finally sort of fatherly approval for what I'm doing, that I was actually getting things done and very seriously. He started sort of noticing that, and actually we came to terms shortly before he died, more or less. So I think this dedication, I don't know if I wrote the dedication before his death or after his death, but it was like, well, in case you didn't manage to see this, here it is. I'm sorry, but that's who I am. So here we are. Yeah, so actually he sort of imprinted that very strong academic standards that I had to fulfill. But at the same time, I stayed being like fiercely mystical and irrational in defiance to him. So that's where I am right now. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. As I said, I really thought that was hilarious. It's like I'm opening up the book to get like, let's get into something serious here, and then I read the dedication, and I'm just like, oh, that's really fun.
If there is something that I might make public, because people see my drawings and make themselves all kinds of ideas, about me. And one thing that it's important to say is I don't take myself too seriously. Like, it's just
Yeah, I think that's important. So, would you mind giving us, sort of, for people that haven't read the book yet or considering picking up the book, could you talk a little bit about exactly what the Ophite Sect is?
well, we only have this very ancient and very small excerpts about them, and they are almost always defamatory sort of recordings of the early church fathers. The Ophites basically believed that Christ was the serpent of Genesis, so he was an incarnation of the snake, and the snake wanted to liberate people from the demiurge, which was the Christian god. And so in this postulate, they basically made a reversal of all Christian logic, essentially. So they understood everything upside down, so to speak, when you only postulate that. I think it's Origen that actually says that they cursed God and Jesus, but that makes no sense. And I think that excerpt of cursing God and cursing Jesus and denying Jesus was his Christian bias, because he basically thought that they were satanic, so to speak. But it was not that way. Clearly what they meant is that they believed in a God, and they believed in a form of Christ. But their form of Christ was the snake, and their form of God was not the creator God. So it was completely a different map. The first time I saw that, I read the description of the Ophy Diagram, I was completely amazed. It was like a vivid sort of visualization with my eyes opened. I just couldn't stop visualizing it, because at the same time it made no sense. I couldn't fit it in one big picture. And what we have are these small defamatory excerpts and this controversy between Origen and Celso. Well, Celsus, I think they call it in English. I call him Celso, which was this pagan that was writing against the Christians. And one of his defamations was actually describing the Ophites and saying, well, what the hell are these Christians that believe in the serpent, and what does all means? What does all this mean? And the answer, which is the book that we keep, by Origen, was saying, well, these people are not Christians at all. They believe in this strange serpent cult. And we both saw this diagram that they have in their temple, and I'm going to explain you how this is not Christian and this sort of crazy cosmogony, and that's where he includes this description. So actually my source material is pretty restricted, because the sort of ground sources for this are very little, and they have not been sort of interpreted for the wider public. They only remain in very restricted academic fields. So I based myself in, I think, one English book, another in German, and that was it. There was also a French one, but there's actually not much about them. And actually that made it like the best source material for me, because I could just invent whatever I wanted artistically, trying to mix all sources that I could find to associate. But it was, that's the kind of material that I always look for when I want to find source stuff for my drawings, because it's like this amazing visionary material that nobody has ever used for art. So I think it was the best topic, and I always had this obsession with the Ophites. So it's what we got right now. So yeah.
Yeah. So and this that I have behind me here, that's what you're talking about right now, correct? The Ophite diagram. In your understanding of it, this is how it came together for you, which is sort of the centerpiece of the book, and also, you know, sold separately as this print by Anathema, which, you know, when all this started to release, I told Gabriel, I'm like, I need that. You know, I'm like, I'm definitely getting the print. I don't know where I'm going to put it on my wall, but I have to find space. But then as I sat down to read the book, and as I got closer to the section where you really go into detail about each of because there's just so much to look at. And I realized, like, this is not at all about having something to hang on my wall. This is about having something to sit down right here in front of me while I'm reading this book, and just the ability to have it in the larger scale. And I just like plop the painting down, or the print down in front of my desk, like on the edge of my desk. So like as I'm reading, I could just keep looking up at it, and it's really an incredible tool to have during the reading process. So one, I'd say to readers, definitely grab one of these things because it's awesome. And what was the size of the original? And what did you and Gabriel what led you to decide to make this large print of it?
Mm-hmm. I think the original is 1 meter in diameter, so the circle itself is 1 meter. It's bigger than print, of course. I think it wasn't printable in that size at all, because it would be. I think so. In total, with the paper, I think it's 1 meter 20. I don't know if you use meters, centimeters, or inches, or so on. I still use meters.
So this is about 2/3 of the size of the original, then.
Yeah, more or less. And I basically just had it on my floor, and I just stepped on it like a carpet and kept drawing on the floor. So, and yeah,
so cool.
I actually had no plan for it because I had no idea if it could even fit in a book. My first idea was, of course, having it like when you open the book, each half of the circle, but that was not actually doable because, as you see in the book, the format is not enough. The circle is too big. So my first idea was just, I had no plan. It was, I'm going to do this one day. I had been waiting. I think I say how many years it was in the waiting since I read that until I could draw it. It was, of course, because of the pandemic that I just said, well, I'm just going to spend 2 dead months of my life doing this because now it's the time, and I've been designing this for years and planning it. And yeah, it seemed just fitting because it was the centerpiece of the book that it could accompany. Another idea that I had was that it was included folded like a big map inside the book. I don't know if you've seen this John Dee books where you can actually unfold the holy table, so to speak.
No, I have not personally, but no, that would probably also be a nice way to go about it.
Yeah, there was another reference that I had. That's one of the, I think it's the edition by Casabon of John Dee's dialogues, where you can actually open the book, and the book is not only a folding plate, but the folding plate becomes a whole map. But that didn't seem doable, and then the print probably would suffer pretty much from folding it that much. So
yeah,
this was actually Gabriel's way, because I actually entrust him a lot of material because I know he's going to give the best result to it. Sometimes I just draw and I'm just like, well, I'm going to do this. I don't know what the hell am I going to do this. I don't know if I'm going to even sell it one day or whatever. Just go for it. So yeah, well, and there it is finally.
In Yao, you've mentioned some of your previous works from A Second Nature and also from Gabriel's Aurorae. So I'm actually surprised that the Ophite Diagram came that late in the process, because that's obviously several years after those other works. So when did this whole thing sort of materialize in your head that you were going to make your own book out of this? Did you sort of have this in mind for a while, or did the pieces just keep falling together?
No, actually, that was the case in A Second Nature, for example, where I just, like, it's a compilation of material that I had done. But Yao was planned since the beginning as Yao, basically. So I think it was since 2017, more or less, that I started sketching for Yao. And yeah, I just make like what I do how I did Aurorae. This is actually what I'm doing with Holy Diamond. I don't know if I'm allowed to announce that.
Sure.
Is that I actually have a draft sort of sketchbook, and I fill it up with the originals, so to speak. So I actually have a book full of the illustrations themselves and how they would go with the text and so on. And that's what I did with Yao. So there was one original Yao, which was sort of a very big and worn out sketchbook that I just kept filling with the original pieces until it all fit how I actually envisioned it. My doodles, when I just have to record stuff for my own memory, are terrible in my own opinion. Only I could understand the relationship between the original doodles and what Yao came to be. But yes, I just have these moments of, well, one could call it revelation, where you just decide in one night what the book's going to be, and you work into that 5 years. I don't know. So yeah, Yao was I think it was, regarding my own work, the one that was planned since the beginning as this. I hope that is reflected in the final work, because it should be sort of more solid, more cohesive, also in style and in the topics. In things like A Second Nature, you could see that the works are way more varied, more miscellaneous. But in Yao, they all make sense, for me at least. I don't know if they will make sense for the viewers. And that's also why I included this demiurge image that I had made, I think, around 2014. It's the most overused, famous piece that I have. People have just stolen it, used and abused it everywhere. It's all around the internet, and a lot of people don't know it's mine. So
yes, this is what I've heard.
But that was actually my first sort of step into this topic, and I feel that like sort of the Ophy Diagram was my last step into this topic, where I could say, well, now the project is complete. And so I sort of included in an honorary way, like, well, this is where you belong, to saying that to the drawing, like, this is the final work for me.
Yeah.
So yes, it was one project, so to speak, one long-term project.
Yeah, well, to me, it definitely comes across that way. But I know from the sort of the notes and references in the book that there were like a couple references to the others. So I figured we'll see where any of that might come in. But yeah, it absolutely feels like a cohesive whole, and it's honestly a brilliant work to my mind. I mean, of all of the books that I've seen from Anathema so far, like, this one is just incredibly impressive to me, especially from an aesthetic perspective. And as I'm only now, it's just released, so I really haven't had time to let it fully absorb to say how well it's going to stick with me as a whole. But to sit down and read it the first time through, it's just absolutely gorgeous. You have so many amazing illustrations packed into this book that they're all so detailed, it's and again, that's why I said it's great to be able to have this in the larger scale, because you can just sort of focus in on any little aspect of it and just kind of sit there and look at it for a while. You literally say in the book that you want people to reach out to you with any sort of adjustments and corrections that might need to be made to this diagram, which I thought that was, really a very humble thing to do. Like, you don't tell me what I've done wrong. This is my work. But you're like, no, if you see something where you're like, look, maybe this could have been like this, let me know. Maybe I'll change it. So I'd like to know how many different iterations this went through before you had the final version of it, and how long you might continue to work on this, even though it's now sort of in its permanent state. It seems like you still aren't stuck saying, hey, we're done with this.
So, well, I think that's like a sort of humanist worldview that I want to keep very open to that knowledge, because well, this is sort of my statement when it comes to, for example, jumping again to religion. I wouldn't say I believe in things. I don't think religion is about belief. It's about experience, and it's about wisdom, so to speak. So you can experience things and gain wisdom, but actually belief is not worth anything for me. And so I am not keeping a belief that I have done this right, or that this is the dogma, so to speak. If somebody might have an actual deeper insight into this, if somebody has way better Latin and Greek than me to read the sources and get out of this, which is very probably the case, please let me know, because I've done my best in this case. But to me, the research is just as fascinating. So I needed to get into this very deep. Actually, Frater Acher helped me a lot, because he pointed out a very essential German source for me about the Ophy Diagram, which is basically a booklet on the matter. So yes, I feel it can be just everything can be just in construction still. In that regard, I mean, the work is finished, but if somebody actually has good arguments to tell me, well, this was wrong and you read it wrong, well, I'm completely open. I would be really happy to find that. So I'm not just going in this crazy monologue that you actually see in that image, because it's like it's like a madman talking when you see that picture. You can just jump into it and get lost. But I don't want it to be that way, because I know I tend to be that way. I tend to just get lost in my own thoughts and keep visualizing. But I want that exchange. And I want actually this to foster people to go to the sources, to examine the things. I would like artists to do that more, to be in dialogue with research, with a wider idea of culture. And that's actually an artistic position that I do have, a posture, so to speak. I really don't like this sort of oracle artists that just say, "Oh, I just decided this, I just made up this, and it's a masterpiece." That's really not my ethics, So yes, I just want to take a different approach there,
Yeah, well, and I think that speaks to something that I really just couldn't help but notice as I read the book is I've known you, as many people will, as being an illustrator, like you're a visual artist to most of us up to the point of you writing this book. And it's blatantly obvious how much thought goes into this as well, and not just thought, but research and deep analysis of things and comparing different sources to find what's the, on that level, how much work went into this. It feels like a lot of work went into the creation of this concept.
Well, I had the concept for many years, this little Ophite readings that I had, and I just went obsessed. I always kept getting back to it. I would say the core of it was a byproduct of my master thesis in art history, because you have to just read a lot more stuff than what you would actually be using for your thesis. So I would say Yao was the sort of byproduct, because I took a lot of the sources that I had to check for Yao instead of my thesis itself. So I kept doing them at the same time. So yes, I actually wrote Yao in about the text, so to speak, in about 3 months, more or less. So the text is actually like automatic speaking.
I was going to say, that's pretty impressive. 3 months. It must have really poured out.
Yeah, it was just pouring out. So I can only guess that it's full of errors. We've tried to check it, but yeah, I just wrote it very hectically, because everything was planned and researched for many years as part of my sort of my academic upbringing. So yes, actually the big work for Yao was thinking the drawings, and that's why my dynamics in this case is that the drawings do not illustrate the text. The text illustrates the drawings, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
this sort of feels like a magnum opus for you, but you're quite a young man, so do you still plan to keep working with this same topic in greater detail, with more books, more drawings, or illustrations, whatever? Do you plan to stick with this, or do you have different directions that you're going to want to move from here specifically already?
Well, I'm a creature of habit. It's nowadays like in vogue to speak about the comfort zone. Like artists like to say, "Oh, I'm gonna step out of my comfort zone and do something experimental." I don't mind. I might be doing the same for 2 more lifetimes and the same type of drawing, because I have more topics to go on with. So technically, I don't really find. I sort of have my language, and what it's important for me is what I'm going to say with that language. And yes, I have to draw a lot more things in the list. My idea is to go deeper with the reproductions and reconstructions of Gnostic gemstones. That was a topic that I approached in Yao as well. And there are many old inventories of these gemstones made in the Renaissance, the 19th century, and so on. And some gemstones still survive, a lot of them. And I feel a lot of work hasn't been done there artistically as well. So I would like to go deep into that. Also, as part of a topic that I'm by now only calling the Book of Idols, or the Old Gods, basically, which is reconstructing many systems of syncretic gods that appeared in the Alexandrian era. They are just like Abraxas, these mixtures of Eastern, Western, Egyptian, Roman, and so on. That is just the most fascinating thing for me. What I love the most are cross-pollination in cultures. That's just the topic that I enjoy at heart. Also, the Book of Idols is an interesting book from Islamic traditions that narrates the idols that were in worship before the coming of Islam, and it is just absolutely mind-blowing. And I want to illustrate that as a series on this sort of old forgotten gods and how gods sort of die and can be reborn at different times. And that actually fits in with my current research, which is more broadly in the topic of idolatry and the problems with it within how Christianity sort of encounters historically, mostly in the 17th century and in 16th century, other religions, and how they conceptualize the idea of the other religion, the idol, the barbarous, the pagan, and so on. And how actually that is sort of the heart of Christianity, of Catholic Christianity, what they take, what they give to pagan traditions. That's always been very puzzling to me because, as I told you, I sort of have a very Catholic medieval unconscious, so I'm always puzzled and fascinated by this relationship with the old gods and how they get forgotten. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there, both conceptually and also visually. I believe in images, so to speak. I like images. The idea of a vision, I try to sketch that in Yao. Like, for me, they are not just drawings. They are like these metaphysical visions that they can convey truth in their own way. And that goes against, of course, the biblical paradigm, because we always think that the text must be above the image. And the image sort of illustrates the text, the holy text, or it is an idol, or it is wrong for us.
Yeah.
And we keep that. Yeah, we keep that in modern art as well, in conceptual art. We don't like images to have too much power, because that actually scares us in the West. And I want to give that images power because I'm very image driven. I believe in visions. I believe in this sort of powerful images that are in themselves revelations. They don't need a text, so to speak. They go beyond the words. So I might look like a reader or a researcher, but I'm completely obsessed with images in themselves, like with the artworks that can actually become enchanted, that can actually become gods, so to speak. So yeah, I don't know if I just...
Well, it must be a very tragic thing for you then, the way that the church in particular has, through the Crusades and various other times throughout history, that so much imagery from so many other religions and just cultures in general, not even necessarily religiously related things, have just been obliterated. And the books, you can sort of hide a book, but you have temples and huge I assume there's probably many artistic works that we will never even know existed that have just been obliterated. And so, do you think for sure that nobody had ever created this at any point in the past before, or I mean, we're sure that one hasn't surfaced, but do you think that it never was done, or that it may have just been destroyed somewhere along the way?
You mean the Ophite Diagram?
Yes, sorry, the Ophite Diagram.
I would love to find out if somebody did.
Yeah.
So again, if somebody knows, please let me know.
Yeah, well, because it seemed sort of open-ended in the book, where you weren't willing to say I am definitely the first person that ever sat down to bring this to life, but you definitely said, like, as far as I know I am, but who knows. So.
And actually, as you see in many other images in the book, I don't want to be original. I don't claim to be the first one doing anything of what it's in there. I take a lot of traditions and I try to be as respectful and as close with their meanings as I can when I make my own version. Same as with this demiurge image. It's not the first one for sure. It might be just a very appealing one, and that's why people like it. But I haven't found anything by myself, and that's the way I like it. I don't believe really in creation as ex nihilo, like people actually making originality, so to speak, when it comes to art. I think artists just use language and they copy each other during many long traditions, sometimes knowing, sometimes without that knowledge, but images in themselves escape the artist, and they have their own lives, and each image can be different still. So, well, that's my sort of position regarding that. So I actually don't want to be the first. As I tell you, if somebody did it in the past, I really want to know, but I haven't been able to find it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, for potential readers of Yao, I'd like to mention, and as a kudos to you, I really think it's an interesting way of writing the book that with not with all, but with a lot of the images throughout the book, you really do sort of go into, this is why I chose the symbolism, this is what this means, this is the ancient source that I've pulled this out of that's inspired me to make this one. And as somebody that wouldn't have caught all of the, because obviously your topic better than I do, a lot of this would have gone right over my head. But to read it and then go back and look again and say, oh yeah, no, I do see what he's doing there, that's really cool. For somebody that doesn't know the topic, that's helpful, and for other academics, that's really is a nice point for them to sort of have a back and forth with you. So I really like that the book came together in that way in a lot of its sections.
Yeah, that actually has happened to me and keeps happening to me in many ways when I see artwork that I love. Because as you learn something, you start seeing different things. So actually you can see something and you can sort of look at something and not see what is behind. And you're never finished with that. You might learn something else and then start recognizing it in artwork even that you think that you knew. So each time is different, and each visualization of the book might be different. In that case, that's how I want it to be. As you learn more, even the sources that I try to convey, sometimes they are too much. I know I have this sort of obscure sort of writing, obscure sort of monologue where I understand what I'm saying, but sometimes people can't keep up, and I just go crazy with myself. I just keep talking like that to myself all the time. And I like the fact that actually every time when you learn something, you start seeing it, because that's why I talk about visions. Visions are actually constructed in your head. They're not perceived by your eyes. And when you don't know something, you might actually not see that thing at all. So vision is a very complex thing, I think. And I think about vision spiritually as well. Just as an end note, I really like the fact that the sort of sages that interacted with the gods in the Rig Veda, they were called the rishis, which are actually the seers, the one who saw the gods, and metaphysically as well. So yeah, that's sort of my ethics and poetics of vision, so to speak, where I believe in images, and I believe that images can reveal through time. They're not simple. They're never one-sided, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'd like this sort of, there's no good place to throw this in, but I would like you to talk about it a little bit. You did mention Frater Acker a few minutes ago. You worked on his Scarlet imprints book, the Black Abbot White Magic. If you'd just like to talk a little bit about that book, maybe, because we've been discussing the Anathema releases here, but I actually haven't read that one yet, and I just looked it up, and all of the other editions are sold out, but the paperback is very reasonably priced, so I'm definitely going to grab a copy of that and have a look. So if you'd just like to talk a little bit about that book, maybe.
That one is about Trithemius. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right in English now. Tritemio, I would call it in Spanish. I would call him Trithemius. He's this very, very prominent figure for the sort of lineage of Western magic as we understand it. When it comes to the German Renaissance, he was precisely this black abbot, so his name is sort of synonymous with black magic sometimes, but he was an abbot in the church, and he tried to disguise his stuff as white magic all the time. Or to publish it as that, and that's actually what Frater Acker traces into that. And I like that duality precisely by my previous posture that I was mentioning. I think that I'm Christian despite the fact that I don't like it, that I don't decide that, I'm just into that world. And so I think that's a very truthful, a very honest take on that, because he actually sort of traces the tradition, traces the relationship between this masters and the practice and publication books and manuscripts of Western magic in a very honestly, historically driven way. That's actually my approach to Western magic. I do believe that it's fully connected to the medieval mindset and also the Renaissance mindset, but it was also always had this problem that how do we disguise, or how do we actually make the statement that magic is also holy for us, that it's a way of holy thinking. And actually many Renaissance thinkers were into that. Pico de la Mirandola also was a big name on that regard, because they didn't make a difference. And actually the modern public is very much confused. I think it's a very common confusion that some things are Christian and some things are blasphemous, and magic is not in there. Basically, that's a very common misconception. We think duality is there, but it had always been there, and during different times it was like a coming and going. And especially in the Renaissance and in the Middle Ages, it was inside the clerics. So actually the clerics practiced black magic and so on. So all types of magic they wrote on. And sometimes they try to make this interesting paradox, that is this concept of white magic. How can we actually carry on this angelic magic and not fall into this conceptual problem that is very rich, very interesting to me. That's why I was also very keen on John Dee, not on the practice of Enochian magic, but on how John Dee understands himself, his worldview. And I think the work on Frater Acher, the work by Frater Acher in general, is very truthful in that regard. I think he actually posits that contradiction in a very important way, because we nowadays think in sort of a black and white difference between modernity and the medieval mindset and sort of Christianity just oppressing things. And well, there were Christians doing all sorts of magic and praying many times a day at the same time. It was completely mixed, and that's actually my way of seeing it and my way of enjoying it. It doesn't bother me, the fact that it's really religious sometimes. This is just like a side note, but not even a note, sort of a joke. I've worked in a lot of black metal albums. People want to go very satanic, and I like trolling people with the fact that I'm completely okay, and sometimes declare myself as very religious in some sense, because it's like, well, just take it or leave it. But I think this tradition was completely embedded in Christianity, and that's a problem for both, for the modern mindset and for Christianity as well. Take it or leave it. I love it that way. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, I to me that's the thing that I sort of felt like I fell into that same pattern that you're talking about, where I just sort of disregarded the things that happened in the medieval period. And the more that I look back on it now, through your work, you've brought it up a lot, through, as you were mentioning, Pico, we've got another great recent Anathema book that talked about him in pretty strong detail. And John Dee, and so many of these interesting guys. But the thing that has, and this is a topic for another day, but the idea that so many of these guys were sitting there doing their thing in their nice houses, and all of the women are out being set on fire is just kind of. And I think that's a thing that brings the misconception into modernity a lot, is like, oh well, they burned the witches, and it's like, yeah, but only the female ones. The men were actually writing books about this stuff, and if you look back at them, they're really interesting books. So again, that's that sort of goes totally off of the topic, but it's a thing that's brought to my attention quite a bit lately.
Yeah, that's actually a very complex topic, because actually the sort of elite magic that was being done in the Renaissance with Pico de la Mirandola had very little to do with the sort of folk magic that happened at the same time in different levels of society. Actually, you can speak about many forms of magic. We should speak always of magic in plural, maybe magics, because
yeah, true.
What has been done, for example, in the Renaissance might have nothing to do with what these witches did, if they even existed, or if they were just a Christian paranoia at a very dark point.
Yeah.
So, and what they did in the Renaissance, which I think is very important, was completely embedded in Christianity for themselves. So that's an important contradiction to tell both the modern public and also the Christian public that thinks, no, there's satanic stuff, and not at all, So yeah. Actually, yes, I haven't really ever gotten into the more pagan-driven witch world, because I'm very book-driven, whether I like it or not.
Yeah.
So my fascination goes with Renaissance magic that actually tried to Christianize it as much as possible. with very complex ideas regarding also Platonic Orientalism, connections with the Zoroastrians, the Persians, and so on, which was perfectly embedded. And it also happened in Islam. They had astrologers and a lot of alchemists and magicians within the completely orthodox way. So I think the most interesting stuff, even despite all the oppression, is when you realize that maybe some forms of orthodoxy have always been heterodox within themselves. And
yeah. Yeah, and and I think you've drawn a lot of attention to that in in your work here. And yeah, so I really appreciate your time, and for viewers, absolutely grab yourself a copy while it's still available in the hardcover editions. There'll obviously be a paperback edition somewhere down the line. I'm sure that seems to be the trajectory with the releases on Anathema, but both of these hardcover editions look really beautiful, and as I said, I can't wait to see what the artisanal looks like. It'll probably be unveiled by the time we release this, but as of now, I have no idea what it's going to look like. So yeah, so is there anywhere or way that you would like people to know how to contact you, or maybe if you have anything that you'd like to share, website, social media, anything like that, before I let you go?
I'm actually a disaster in that regard.
That's fine.
Yeah, because I'm working like 100% in private commissions that are sort of booked. So I have no really public place to go right now.
Yeah.
My stuff is all over the internet, despite the fact that I might not really like that.
Yeah.
So it's chaos. But I'm going to stick with Anathema, most likely, regarding prints and forthcoming books. Also, Frateracher's publications are on the way, and so on. I have to wrap things up and maybe one day make myself more officially represented. But as things are, I have so much to do that I'm fine this way.
Yeah,
So,
well, that's a good thing. No need to.
yeah, my public presence is a disaster, so to speak. So, but well,
No worries with that one.
yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, like I said, man, thanks a lot for your time, and highly recommended book. I hope everybody will have enjoyed the interview, and for people watching, like and follow, obviously, and definitely grab a copy of Yao Aurorae, also through Anathema. As of now, these prints are still available. I highly recommend these. So thanks to you for being with us, and thanks to everybody else for watching. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks a lot for the interest. Cheers.
Cheers.